Okay, well, let's continue talking about rendering. And today's inspiration will be about rendering lines and what exactly lines are. Right now, a lot of people, when they think of lines, no one can blame them. They tend to sort of think of them as these sort of separate category from light and shading, right? We tend to think like it goes lines. I do my lines, right? Right, I do a line, I do a line, I do a line, right? They're lines, right? And then we move to the shading of the character, right? Then we shade and all this stuff, right? Do light. Like, these are not connected is how we think. But this is not actually the case, especially if you want to get really good line art. Like, you may have seen the memes, perhaps you personally experienced this, where your sketch feels much more fun and lively than your line art. And there's a reason for this. The reason for this comes back to this root problem where you're not thinking in shade and light and shape and form. You're thinking as lines as this separate entity that you just do in between your sketch and in between your light, right? So what exactly is a line truly, right? So what a line really is it's a way to communicate to viewers form, right? Where light and shadow are. Because when you exist in real life, there's no lines around you, right? Unless you're seeing someone do a Borderlands cosplay. Then there's lines everywhere. But outside of that, there's no actual lines. There's just 3D space and light, right? So, I'll give you an example. So, by the way, here's a fun digital trick, total side. If I just slap in this, like a brush supersized up with no shape on the brush, it just makes this, whoops, like this. Hold on. And if you erase out the center, you get like a perfect circle. It's really cool. One of my favorite little tricks, just like, boop, circle, right? So, normally when we draw a line, you can see it's an even shape all the way around, right? But this doesn't tell us anything about the form of the object. Whereas if I were to do something more like, I would just hit all the wrong buttons, as is tradition. If I were to do something like this, you see that change in thickness between the top and the bottom? That gives you more of an idea of where the light is, doesn't it, right? Doesn't the one on the right feel like there's light coming from the top left versus the one versus the shape on the left? Do you guys see that? That's the basis of lines. Now, if there's a really strong light coming from the top there, right? Because the let's call it the intensity of the thickness of the line versus the thinness of the line dictates how much light is hitting it and how much form the object has. So if I do something like this suggests there's so much light coming from the top left that you can't actually differentiate between the two forms in your brain, right? So let's do this from a side view, show you what I mean. Okay. Let's grab just a regular old brush here. Bigger, 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 bigger. Better. Okay. So, got some color here. Let's say our light's coming down, right? We have light. Boom, 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 boom. And we have a form here, right? Just this, like, I don't know. It's a bump on a Viking shield, right? You know what I'm talking about? I have the Viking shield. Oop. Here's the blood of your enemies. All right, there's that bump. Okay, that's what this is. That's what I decided. We're going to go along with it because I said so. So, as the light's coming down, right, it's hitting here and here, right? But this is all catching shade. Okay? So, if we look at this object from straight on, how do we make the lines? Right? So, I'll make that big circle again. Right, do about the same size too. So here's our circle. Here's a little erase trick because I'm cool. You do something like this, right? This suggests there's a lot of light, a very strong light from the top. You could also do it a little less if you wanted. Maybe do something like this I showed before, right? And the more that you do this, where you erase some of the top, the more you tell viewers that this area up here has a very strong amount of light. Or, conversely, what you might be telling viewers is that the protrusion of the form is less pronounced. By which I mean, because that's kind of a mouthful for words, right? There's variations here, and I'll just scoot these down. I said I'll scoot these down. Oh, Photoshop, how dare you. Okay, so we could say that this one here in situation A is a very large bump on our shield, right? Whereas in situation B, let's say we have a little tiny bump, right? Just a little itty bitty one. In situation B, you're going to see much less form in the line, right? Starting to like make sense how you actually place lines. So you're gonna see something more like this, right? More like that, right? Because it's a very shallow form in 3D, so we need less lines to show the form. Because what's happening, where it's this thicker part down below, right, where it's thicker, this is correlating to the shade, right? And the thickness of the line correlates to the depth of the form, right? Is that a big one for you there? I'll even write that one down. That's a good one. Right? So, the thickness, or should do line thickness, is not equal, but relative to the depth of form, right? So that's what lines are actually doing, is they're telling you about depth, depth of forms, right? That's what's really happening. So let's move to some real examples of human beings, which I know you all love to draw. Love to draw, not drove. To make some more sense of this. Everyone with me so far? Everyone makes sense? I'll give you a couple seconds to chat something. Oh, the window's not open here on the... Oop. Here we go. There's a chat. Yeah, okay. Oh, pardon. Are you all making sense of this so far? So any questions before I move on to using human forms? But lines are actually for showing form. They're really doing. And yes, I am recording. Okay. I'm going to take that everyone's following along, so let's move on to this dude I found who has lots of interesting musculature and other surfaces, like the cloth and the helmet on here, to kind of get some of this across. Okay. So, get a little, let's get a version of this that's turned down so I can show you how we do this. Okay. So, looking at our dude here, turn this up a little. That's probably, yeah, that looks about right. Okay. So, let's use red and black, good colors. And before we start drawing lines, I want you to think about the form of this figure, okay? Because like when you're drawing in a pec line, you're like, oh, it's a pec line and I'm done, right? But I want you to think about this object in 3D space, this human object. So let's take a look at this chest here. If this was from the side, what's happening is there's the pec, right, nipple, and it comes up into the shoulder, clavicle, right? There's the deltoid, blah, 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 tricep, blah, blah. We got a whole musculature video on that, right? Ab 1, ab 2, ab 3, belly button, bottom of the abdomen, right? So if light's coming down, and I'm going to color these in for you, so it's nice and clear, right? So the light here is coming from the top left as usual, right? The light's coming down like this, and it's kind of hitting. We'll do the fancy one so you can kind of, right? It's doing that, right? You can see there's hot spots. All this, right? This is all light. Let's make him just a little lighter. There we go. Right? See these areas of light here? I wanted to get this nice high contrast one. We'll keep it simple shapes. Right? You can see there's all these just subforms. We've been talking about that a lot, so hopefully this is starting to make some sense. I'll do the rough ones here. As we go back to our side view, and I'm going to just say the light's coming straight from the top in this one, just so it's a little simpler. In all these subforms, this light is hitting on top like this, right? You're going to get some here, 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 so on and so forth. And then, of course, on the opposite side, we see there's shade here, because there's a form, right? There's some shade here, there's some shade here, there's some shade here. Why? Because, as you remember from the lighting lectures, that things cast shadow. I know, real shocker, right? So, like, here's a form, right? These are all just the bottoms of forms, right? And what these tell us, like around the shapes of the forms, where all these intermediary shapes locked together, like where the circle of a shoulder meets the cylinder of an arm, there's these kind of meetings of form, right? And this is where we start to put lines. Lines are to show more intense drops in the 3D shape of an object, right? So when you're drawing a chest, that bottom line that you think of when you think of the pec, right? This whole area is where you would put a line, right? And then the thickness of the line tells a viewer how deep that form is. Now, a pec, even in someone who's roided out, is not super deep, right? We look at our dude over here. Let's turn this off. Let's save this. We can come back to it. I don't want to delete it because I want to make sure it's there for the later reference. So we're just going to clear this out. So, thinking about this, right? When we draw a line on our character, because the pec is not a super huge depth, we're not going to put a super hard line there, right? You might put like a thinner line here because the area between the two pecs is a very small change in plane, right? Making sense of this so far? You kind of see how lines work now, right? So like when you have your whole muscle drawing, okay, like here's your muscles, right? What you want to do is you can almost start with it and then just erase out areas based on the form, right? Make sense? Same thing, I can just like, okay, here's the muscle, because, you know, we talked about blocking out all of these areas when you're doing your study, but the human body isn't really constructed like this, so even though we have all these muscles here, right, he has all of, this guy's ripped, which is why I picked this image, right? And this might be a trick for you to make sense of this, right? So here, I'm going to block this and show you. So here's like all the rib cage. We have all the muscles. We did a really good study of our form, right? What you can do is you come in and erase areas based on the depth of the form, right? So see how this just kind of gets that across? You see that? It's all making sense. Does this help you a bit there, Dragon? Because I know this was something you were asking about. Right? Remember, the light is coming from this area, so the lines are thicker on this, or sorry, thinner on towards the light and thicker away from the light. Right? See how the forms are all doing that. Right? You can see I'm doing more erasing towards areas that would catch light. See that? Are you seeing it? Better. Don't worry if this is like a little daunting at first, because this will all come as a second sense as you keep going, right? Right. So if I turn off our reference here, you can see that's not a decent. It's like that's a decent set of lines, right? You can see the abs are still a little too much because abs don't have super big changes in the depth, right? So you just keep erasing it out. Right, and if you zoom out, it's like, that's not a bad set of lines to work with, right? This all making sense so far? How you set your lines based on form? Give me some yeses. Let me know where we're going. Or some no's if I have to keep clarifying. We're just starting to clickety-click. We're getting some light bulbs out there. We're like, oh, okay, that's how I put the lines together. Is that making more sense for his dragon, right? Okay, good. Okay. And this is not just for muscle. This works for everything, right? So you can see here are the actual areas of light still there. That's why I picked this one, because it has this nice loincloth, right? Same thing. We'll do this in a different color. Green, right? So blocking out the rough forms, right? Because remember when we talked about clothes, it kind of has these bunches up, right? Remember all that? That baseline, you know, that's all there. So let's turn this guy off. Here's the actual blocks of form. Thinner lines towards the side of the light, thicker lines away. So as you think of these as cylinders, you just kind of erase towards where the light hits, right? Look at that. And suddenly we have like a really great looking set of lines. And I've just done a couple little erases, right? See what I mean? This one's going to be like fully in the shade, so we'll just throw that in there. Right? So this is how you create line art that just looks really good, is you vary the thickness based on the form, right? And something for you to think of in terms of your process, you can either, once you get really confident, you'll do this naturally. Like when I draw, not to say I'm the best, but you know, when I'm drawing a form, I'll go thin and then thick and then thin, very naturally, right? I'll just know it's thin over here, thick over here, right? But if you're like, I'm not really confident enough to do that just yet, and you will be if you practice, you can just do your basic lines and then come in later on a second pass and thicken bottoms and thin tops with an eraser and just sort of add it in as a second step until you really get that feeling for where things should go as you build out that sense of 3D-ness in your head. Because I think it's a skill where you're allowed, where you were not allowed, but you have the ability to build 3D forms in your head. Because what you really want to do when you're learning art and drawing and form is you want to learn how to put a 3D model in your head, and then you stop drawing and you start sculpting, but you sculpt with lines, right? You're taking this 3D form in your head and then you're trapping it in a 2D form, right? So let's go and look at his helmet here, because I wanted a smooth surface. Do pink. Yeah, right? So blot out the forms. Forms, right? We're just doing the really rough forms. Right, here's a little lip here. Here's a big flat piece, right? Oh, I'm about to start racing naturally. Ignore that. Don't do it. Okay, right? Right. Okay. Same thing. Turn them off. We don't need them. Say it with me. Scream it across the country, wherever you are. Thin lines towards the light, thicker lines away from the light, and thicker lines where there's a larger change in the form or the plane or the depth or however you want to think about it, right? So we come in here, thinner. And this is a little trick for you. On surfaces that are really reflective, just don't even put the line there. It gives us this really, it really helps sell the depth of the object. See what I mean? Some light erasing, right? This is a very bright, bronzy object. This is right in the middle of the Bronze Age. He has a nice, fresh helmet. He's off to go and invade some Egyptians or something, or whatever the Greeks are doing for fun. Right, this lip of the helmet is not a super big change in depth, so I'm going to bring that down a little bit. Right, just a little lip. Right? These are not super big changes. Right, and the line thickness changes. See how this one's thinner over here, and then it gets thicker? These are all those little tricks you can do to help make your art feel more alive, right? You see that? Y'all see that? I'm gonna go make some sick liner, and you like here, if I start drawing it in, you know, here's a thin one, here's a thick one on this side, right? Start just plotting it in real naturally. You'll just kind of know, okay, a little thinner, thinner, the thinner, 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 thinner. I want to do a little thick one here, thin, thin, thick, 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 right? This is how you do line art that just looks awesome, right? Now, with that, I want to talk about where you mix your shade and your values with your lines, right? So we got our dude here, but you'll notice it's super high contrast, right? Which is part of why I picked this, right? So let's turn him down a little bit. Make a new layer. And looking at our fella here, you can see this leg that's retracting into the background here. This one, it's like really dark, right? And what I'm going to do actually, because I want to make this super clear, is I'm going to make this layer. Little trick I use in Photoshop. I'm sure your programs have it. It's either called posterize or threshold, but it takes it and puts it into incredibly simple shapes, right? You can just turn it down into 2 values and it'll tell you exactly where the light and the shade are, right? So you see these really strong, lighter here, right? So now you can see where the dark and where the light is. And as we covered in the lighting series of lectures, this map of light and dark is super helpful for making art that feels very 3D, right? So we have our example here of these lights and these darks. Let's go back over to our line art here. And you can combine, this is where you can start to see how your lines and your shade can start to interact. This is especially big in painting, because when you do painting, there aren't lines, right? You're just using forms. You're just using light changes and value changes to communicate form to somebody, because you really don't need lines. Lines are, you know, they're kind of a thing that happens in cartooning to give a really quick sense of a form, but lines aren't actually the most comprehensive way to show form to viewers, right? But it's however you want to do your own art. They're all just tools, right? To share images with people. So when you're doing your shade, a trick you can do is you can use lines and values in your shade that are kind of similar, right? So take this, I'm going to do something a little darker. And let's take this area right here, right? See that? This nice big sawtooth kind of shape. And I'm going to just put this in over on our buddy here. Right? Right, right, right. And it's coming right across, and then it comes in. So let's cover all of this in shade. Shade, 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 shade. Color it in, color it in. You see how the lines and the shade are now kind of working together to kind of help create the form. Make that a little lighter, actually. I think it's a little hard to see on my end. It's probably much harder to see on your end. Right? There. Oh, I see what I've done. Oh my god. Stop, dude. You goon. Goof. Right? And now your lines and your form are working together. Because they're really just different tools for doing the exact same thing, right? You're just showing form. All of drawing is you're just communicating form to viewers, right? That's all you're doing. You don't even have to put lines everywhere. You can also just kind of block out some form, and you can use lines as a way to create focal points, right? Hopefully this is all getting your brain going as you kind of think about what you're really doing when you draw. You're just using various shape languages to communicate 3D form to people, right? That's what you're doing. All right, starting to make sense? All right. You can see, this is one of my personal favorite. This is how I like to do my own drawing, is where you kind of mix and match the intensity of the detail around areas and the rest is very loose. Like, I personally love how this line just kind of stops happening, and then we just block in the form down here, right? And then what I would keep doing is I would just keep refining this area up here, and that's my own sort of personal style when I'm not doing contracts or commissions. I'm just drawing for fun. I love just creating hyper detailed focal points and letting the rest just kind of fade into the mist of the paper or the screen behind it. But that's a bit of a tangent. What I'm really hoping is that you pick up the idea of how your lines and your shadow are kind of doing the same thing, and they really should be working together, right? Making sense? You all learning something? Have any questions? That would be about the extent of what I wanted to say to y'all. That helped you, Dragon, with your issue about the muscles when you asked me? Feeling some confidence there? Just, no. Okay. Well, we'll cover that in the Q&A. Did you learn something otherwise? Good. Okay. Well, we'll cover that in the Q&A. Kind of a cool looking piece of art, isn't it? I like that. I like that. That looks kind of cool. It's kind of neat looking, huh? What do y'all think? I'm just doodling now. We're just going to doodle the rest of this helmet here, and then I'm going to call that the recording. And then we'll jump into some Q&A for y'all. I'm going to just render this in, because sometimes, I know for my part, when I was learning, it's helpful to just watch somebody work and go like, oh, that way. Oh, that way. So maybe hopefully I can do that for you. And I'm pretty happy. Oh no, we gotta do the freaking cloth, man. Here. We're not done yet. I'm not done. Cool. All right, I'm stopped recording there. For anybody that wants to watch it, obviously, peace, I love you, and a recording.